Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Jennifer JJ Minella, and I am not here with my lovely co-host, Drew Conry Murray, because Drew is gallivanting about someplace in the world, and I am on site here live at Mobility Field Day 13, and I'm recording instead with two guest co-hosts. I have Jonathan Davis, who some of you may know is my partner, and then I also have Allyn Crowe, and both of these people have some pretty strong feelings about the various topics we saw presented in the past 3 days. So let me just give you a little bit of a taste. If you're not familiar with the Tech Field Day events, they're pretty cool. They bring together 12 delegates. So the three of us that are sitting here now were delegates, and they have different manufacturers and vendors come in and present their solutions, give updates across different topics. So sometimes it's networking, sometimes it's wireless and mobility, security, etc. This was a Mobility Field Day. So this week, we've heard from Cisco, Juniper, Fortinet, Arista, Solona, Nile, and Ubiquiti. So you're going to hear those 7 companies mentioned throughout this, and we definitely encourage you to go watch the videos at techfieldday.com. All of that was streamed live, but it's also available on demand. Okay, so we're going to talk through several things today. I want to talk about secure by default. You know, this is a mobility field day, not a security field day, but there was a security component to pretty much everything that we saw from each of these 7 vendors. And we've talked about growing complexity. We've talked in the security space about secure by design, and then as a subset of that, secure by default. And JD, you had, I think what we would describe as a rather visceral reaction during one of the presentations.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me on. And this does happen to be a topic I'm a little bit passionate about, and they did get a little bit of a passionate response from me. What we saw was essentially a willingness from the Meraki team to allow default behavior that was open, right? Ultimately, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about if you set up an SSID, you don't assign it into a particular VLAN, it's going to go into the default management VLAN. And so you could potentially set up a new SSID that maybe it's open because you're testing, you haven't built your guest form yet or whatever, but by default, it's providing open access into your management network. You know, this is something that Cisco did with the ARANET controllers.
Way back.
And in fact, that's actually the point, right? This was a mistake that was made, all the way back in the 4400 controllers. And I was honestly shocked to see it made in the Meraki platform.
Let me jump in once to anybody that's listening that's going to watch the videos, because specifically this was in the Meraki Campus Gateway appliance. So the Meraki Campus Gateway is something they recently announced that is meant to be a tunnel terminator for that client data traffic for Wi-Fi networks. So basically, if you don't have a controller, but you want to bring all the traffic back to one central place, we've been using the MX firewalls to do that. This is a newer, more scalable way to do it. And it was in one of those configurations.
Absolutely,
Is that where we saw it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm happy to see them developing this product. I'm happy to see the scale that it's capable of and the way it's going to empower, organizations, to really kind of grow their environment. A single cluster can support up to 5,000 access points, which is exceptionally large compared to the limits that we've seen previously in Meraki.
Yeah, they said, I think, with the MX firewalls, I think what they said is it could support up to 1,500 tunnels, and each tunnel is defined per SSID per AP. So 1,500 sounds like a lot, but when you take however many APs you have times however many SSIDs you have, you can eat that up pretty quickly, even in a mid-sized organization. Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of additional capability here. It's a great announcement. My reaction really was to the fact that I felt like they were pulling forward this works by design or works by default feature set from literally 20 years ago that created issues for so many engineers, because you did run into those situations where you'd have an access point out in your network somewhere that's running default configuration because it got missed in some way, and that default configuration actually allowed users to get into parts of the network they shouldn't be.
And I think that the Meraki stuff, I'm not picking on any vendor. Every vendor does something that I don't like. Everybody's baby has some toe that's too short or too long. There's several things I think they've done growing up kind of in that small business kind of almost prosumer space of like, I don't want them just advertising an SSID as soon as I plug your thing in. Absolutely. Even if you're saying you've natted and it's internet only, I don't care. I don't want that happening. Right. So it does sound like, though, that with the advent of this device and then some of the other changes they're making, Meraki's kind of trying to grow up into that meeting the traditional Cisco portfolio kind of, they're meeting in the middle. And I think Ubiquiti's following that same thing. I was actually pretty surprised by what we saw there. But I'm going to save Ubiquiti for a little bit, but I'm curious. So secure by default and secure by design. We have the one side where we saw, okay, Meraki did some stuff we didn't love. We saw some settings from Cisco and screenshots that they showed, like where
All
you
the
could,
settings.
yeah, you could configure all of the settings. There were like, you selected the AKMs of which they presented and exposed like 15 options to you. And if you selected wrong combinations, you're screwed. And then just today, the last day of the event, we saw Nile, and Nile throws their infrastructure in and basically says, don't worry about it. We got you, boo, hands off. And I know, like Allyn, some of the delegates have had some strong feelings about this. So I feel like the pendulum is too far one way and it's too far the other way. Where's the middle?
I think that there's definitely, we see both sides of that, right? We see the Ciscos where we see every single possible ever combination that's ever been
Even if it's never
exposed.
going to work.
It's never going to work. It doesn't gray it out. You've got to be smart enough to know, don't select these three things together. And then on the flip side of it, we've got the single checkbox turn on AP, that everything behind that is a black box. And I think there has to be some place in the middle where it's the guardrails, right? I'm going to give you some guardrails here. I may let you do something, because there are times where we have to, as Wi-Fi practitioners and network practitioners, as security practitioners, we have to do something stupid.
Yes.
And we know we have to do it. We know it's stupid and we know we shouldn't do it, but we need to be able to do it. And I think that's the piece where, right now we're really seeing one side or the other. It's all or nothing. And I think the traditional network vendors and the newer ones who are coming up from that real easy simplicity, easy to configure and deploy, they've got to find somewhere in the middle where, hey, I need to be able to do something that, yes, I shouldn't do it. Sure, pop up a warning. Are you sure? Are you really sure? You really shouldn't do this. Are you sure? And I have to go to click it, and then it's on me. But yeah, how do we find that middle ground? Where do we do it? I think we've seen it, especially in the traditional networking space, some of the configurations where you click advanced, right? And now it gives me some more information. And then I've seen it where there's 2 or 3 buried levels of advanced, because you're not going to keep clicking advanced unless you know what you're doing, hopefully. And then give me a warning of, you shouldn't do this and here's why. Not to be the first person to throw the words AI out, but I think that's where some of the AI backend that we could have could provide some of that information of, hey, you shouldn't do this. Here's a 1-sentence reason why. I think that is a great way that AI can come in and help educate us as we're doing it.
Well, I think too, it really comes down to UI design, right? Especially when we're moving towards everything being hosted and managed in the cloud. It should be simple to say, I see, page 1 is you want to set up a network. Do you want it to be passphrase based or .1x based or open? Okay, I see you said passphrase. Do you need these features, right?
Right.
Roaming, for example. And it should be simple to walk people through so that it makes it easy for those who don't understand all the AKMs, right? So we're kind of a little bit doing that on and works by design, right? We're meeting that requirement while also ensuring that we're not offering a screen that's got FT settings. But if you enable the FT settings and you don't enable the FT AKMs, you're actually not enabling FT. Right?
Right.
There's got to be that middle ground, and there's got to be ways of getting there so that we can meet that, but also so that it works for those folks who, if you tell them, AKM 5, they don't look at you like you've lost your mind and you're speaking a different language. So I think that's important as well.
And I don't think any vendor does this perfectly. I mean, again, fingers too long, too short in all of them. I can make the argument that I've appreciated a lot of what, Juniper was here presenting. I've appreciated a lot of what they do in their platform because I feel like they expose most enough of what most professionals need to know to configure. But they also make it available through APIs on the back end if you need to do more than that. So it's much harder to shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah. On the other hand, for very security conscious organizations where we're trying to do, certain cipher suites for things, it is other work to make that happen. Yeah. But then I look at, Meraki, and I'm not picking on Meraki, but you have a platform that was designed to be so easy to use, a caveman can do it basically. But we've even seen settings there where it's like, you pick your generation of security, right? WPA 2, 3, et cetera. And then, protected management frames is a separate setting, only it's not even called protected management frames, right? It's referred to as its prior 802.11 substandard is 11W. And then it's, is it like not enabled, optional, or required? So you have to piece together what it means for a WPA3, transition mode network to know, oh, you need to select this, and you have to know like the point being, they've definitely made a lot of strides fixing stuff like that. I think all the vendors have. But Ubiquity, now that I'm thinking about it, came out, and some of what they showed was they had like, I don't want to call it basic configs, but kind of these starting points. And they had, at least in the screenshots that we saw, which was just a few of them, it sounded like good plain English explanations of what a setting would do for you or not do for you. So they started you in a place that is like, 98% of people should configure this way. And if you feel like you need to change it, we're going to explain to you what that change is going to be doing. And I'm surprised almost to see that from a company like Ubiquiti, just because I kind of think of that as more of in the prosumer space, but it seems like they really are. I don't know that I would call it enterprise. It's definitely not enterprise with a capital E. I would say it's business class, maybe on its way to enterprise with a little e.
So I haven't tracked Ubiquiti for a while, and I think what I saw today versus what I've known before, the joke has always been you can't slap the word enterprise on a product and be an enterprise product.
Yeah.
But I think what I saw, the direction and the trajectory they're trying to take it, they are actively trying to move in that direction. I think you're right, though. They're not there yet, but they did have some cool, I think coming from the consumer space, I think they have a better handle on UI or UX. I guess that's the new term these days, right? They have a better handle on what it takes to put together an interface that is helpful and guides you without overwhelming you.
And their team seems to really know their stuff.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't like some hobbyist networky Wi-Fi person that was like, oh, I'm going to sell business equipment. They know their stuff.
It's funny, like you, it's been a while since I've really looked at it. I was not expecting to be as impressed as I was. I think I had heard them use the term enterprise. You can't help but roll your eyes every time you hear it for some of the reasons that we're talking about, because we can all think of companies that have used that term and obviously don't know enterprise. But they are making some strides there. They are doing some really cool things. And I think the thing I like the most, and I think it goes to, experience at Tech Field Day events, it was obvious the things that they were like, they know it was a weakness. They know it was an issue or they didn't have the right answer. They immediately just like, we know that's out there. We know we have to fix that. We don't have an answer right now. And being able to say that, do that, and immediately move on is just like,
it was refreshing.
Yeah, it's like, okay, cool. So at the very least, they're transparent, right? And they're also aware.
And we've seen so many wireless, I'm not going to name names right now. I'm just going to leave it at that. But we've definitely had, I think, years of wireless vendors who shall remain nameless not doing that. And it causes huge problems, that lack of transparency. All right, our timer's gone off for this topic, but along the same thread, if I can move us on to talking about, speaking of complexity, we saw some weird stuff these past 3 days with lots of add-ins on access points. JD, you want to kick us off on this one?
Okay, so the thing that really kind of spurred this conversation, I think, Fortinet showed off an access point with a screen on top.
Concept. Access point concept.
Yeah.
Excellent clarification. They have this thing they expect to release it sometime next year. So they're obviously early in the kind of design phase. They're thinking through the process, thinking through the possibilities and use cases. And of course, this is where it's worth watching the video feeds, but it is a compact access point that has a screen that covers the majority of the top of it, maybe 70% of the top of that access point. So it's not a small screen that's just going to give you port and status. It's a screen that's expected to be used for something. And I think a lot of us really kind of went, one, that's cool, like as kind of an initial gut reaction, but then you immediately start thinking through use cases, and we all struggled to kind of come up with a use case that made sense for the amount of time and energy and development that's going to go into the product, but also into deploying the product, right? Because now we're talking about more PoE and more services that are going to be running on the device.
More breaky, because it's an LCD, which, they're not impervious to physical impact.
It's got a lifetime on that LCD. There's issues like burn-in to consider. There's the power requirements. There's the heat that's going to come along with that.
It definitely felt like the Cybertruck of access points.
Yeah, and so I worked in the digital signage world. Yeah. So targeted devices specifically to do that. And some of the concepts they were bringing up is, they're talking about it's going to be full HD motion capable video, right? So now you've got not just a screen, but the video processing power behind it to drive full motion video. And you're also going to have to put storage in there. You're also going to have application to deliver content to that. At first I was like, hey, that's cool. And then it's like, yeah, but where do we deploy access point? Right. And this access point was built off of a ceiling mount access point platform. Well, it's not a great place to put an LCD. So now we're talking about wall mounting it. Okay, cool. We've done that. We've dealt with that in the Wi-Fi world. We can get around it. But now you're talking about it's a big enough screen. Let's call it maybe 4.5 to 5 inches square. give or take, I think. It's big enough that you can put stuff on there and it'll be visible, but if you put full video, it's going to have to be within 3 to 5 feet. Well, now we've got to deploy that AP on the back of a cash register in a retail store. Well, that's not where I need an AP, right? Yeah. And so I think there was some of these, you were right, we all had this, hey, that's cool. Oh, wait.
Because if it's where you can see it, it's where you can touch it.
Yep.
And I'm not a fan of that because, I mean, coming from federal contracting space, like having to physically secure APs and ports.
Yeah.
That's just not a fun thing to do. So I guess, I don't know. I think our feeling with this is the team that presented, I think they know their stuff too. I want to give them kudos for thinking outside the box and, and exploring strange new worlds. I'm confused as to whether, I don't know that I want to go little Mars with them on this one. But we also saw some IoT. Not that this is new, but we saw some IoT stuff. Yeah. And I think, was it even Fortinet that had the LoRaWAN built in?
They have a LoRaWAN product.
Okay.
We saw LoRaWAN on a couple of products this week. The greater discussion here is when does it stop being an access point? When you consider the fact that we're putting BLE radios, we're putting 15.4, whether that's Zigbee or Thread or what protocol du jour into it. We're talking about putting a screen into it. They have USB. What we're doing is we're continuing to put services on a device that technically should be about single function, maybe a couple of functions. Of course, we also have the ultra-wideband radios for location services. Now we also have GNSS or GPS receivers on them. So the device itself is becoming more and more complex, running more and more services on an access point.
Well, and like the screen, I'm kind of thinking of this from a compliance and data security perspective, which is, as soon as they talk through some of the, and again, I think they're just kind of exploring with this concept and playing with it, so it's not like they're locked in and have a really clear view of what this is. Yeah. But some of the things they were kind of tossing out there is maybe perhaps is in the futures, some of it was marketing stuff, and I'm like, okay, well then your marketing team, like not your person managing your firewall, needs to log in and interact with whatever the content that they're uploading.
Yep.
But that's obviously going to be hosted with the firewall. I'm very uncomfortable with exposing it. Like that makes me uncomfortable. And then one of the examples was using it in a, at a point of care for patients in a healthcare setting where the doctor might be able to bring up, certain things on the screen. And of course, my smart comment was, oh, now you want to be in scope for HIPAA with this. In this world where everything is just sprawling and complex and we're trying to wrap our heads around asset management and understanding where our data lives and putting the policies around it, some of this makes me uncomfortable. I'm less uncomfortable with the IoT stuff. And I think that's just because when I first started working in wireless, like it wasn't just Wi-Fi. That Wi-Fi was like the smallest piece and there were other things, especially the 900 megahertz band. And it was like everything collapsed towards Wi-Fi. And now we realize that's really probably not the best way to go. And now we're kind of spreading back out. So I almost like the idea of having the visibility of the IoT devices at least built into something that's centrally visible and managed with the organization. So I don't mind that aspect as much. I do think that we have to think about it. But some of this is just getting a little crazy.
Yeah, I know I called it out as an add-on to the AP. I'm completely on board with you. I feel like if we can deploy one IoT and wireless network, that's the ideal way to do it. Because ultimately now you're managing firmware on one device in that space.
And we saw private cellular.
Right? We did see private cellular, and I think that's another thing that's coming in. I think, on the IoT side, I think the other thing it does net us from a security aspect is we've seen these special case networks that get deployed in a facility that IT has no clue about. And you know what I mean? And we know they're not patched, they're not maintained, they're not any of that. At least by shifting that infrastructure onto a controlled infrastructure, we do gain some ability there to say, okay, no, we've got to watch this. I had it with a client that was trying to connect a water shutoff valve. And I'm like, this is your main building water shutoff valve. We've got to make sure that when we do this, we do it right. And we're not just going to slap it out on your guest VLAN and hope for the best. So it was, building that into the central IT. I think there's a lot of good momentum there for us. But yeah, on the private cellular side, like that's a whole new world. And I think it's interesting. I really was happy to see that. That presentation was one of my favorites.
Yes. And it was Solona.
Yeah.
And, there's no secret here. I'm a huge fan of Solona because I like what they do and I like how they do it. Now they're early in the space, I think, but this is one of the things I get in arguments with some of the analysts at like Gartner and Forrester about because years ago they're like, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. And I'm like, no, I think companies like Solona are ahead of the market demand for it. And I think part of it is a lot of us in this space, if we've been involved in networking for a long time, we're not taught these things, right? Cellular is its own, we don't touch cellular, we don't talk cellular, we don't want to. And I think just like with the IoT protocols where we're having to start to expand our knowledge, I think we have to start learning these other technologies and these wireless technologies, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's in the corporate environment, and like healthcare especially is a fantastic. In fact, Salona showed a freaking killer use case, real world deployment. I think it was Stanford Healthcare. I know that's one of their logos they've got.
Yep.
Video and everything. If you guys didn't see that, go watch the video because it was super cool. They did a great job in my opinion. But we can't just keep going and saying, no, we don't want to support something for the business, right? A business need for digital transformation because we don't understand it.
Right.
Or maybe more accurately, we feel like we don't have the time to go learn something new. We've got to stop doing that.
I think it comes down to some labeling too. So we've heard private cellular, private cellular, private cellular. And I think it goes beyond the thought of me running my own cell with my own registration system, my own eSIMs on devices and that kind of thing. It goes beyond that. I think what they showed too is the neutral host stuff where now you're talking about replacing DAS systems, digital antenna systems within buildings, with a really cool use case. So now you're offering services, not just your own managed devices where, okay, can I get away with some Wi-Fi bridges and that kind of stuff to kind of simulate it for the few cases? But now you're really, especially in the healthcare industry, I mean, we all know you go into a hospital and you lose signal. It's just the nature of the beast.
And so much of the nurse, paging systems, I'm not picking on anybody, but like Vocera, because I think they have some cool stuff. Like they moved from those legacy devices, but then they moved to, iPhones for a while with the SIM card taken out. But then you've got, the elevator. Wi-Fi is not the right answer all the time. And so, we got to learn other stuff. I mean, you've been working I'm looking at JD, you've been working in IoT space for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love some of the protocols. The private cellular happens to be one of those I'm pretty passionate about. I think there are places where it's a great add-on, right? And then there are places where I feel like it's just a no-brainer. In the past, I've worked in manufacturing and warehousing, right? If I was in logistics, there's zero question, because one of the biggest issues you run into in large warehouses is the roaming behavior of Wi-Fi clients. It doesn't matter, like you spend a lot of time and energy making certain that your coverage is not just you've got good coverage, but all of your roaming, is going to work perfectly. There's a lot of energy and time and troubleshooting that goes into that, even for those of us who have done it for decades, right? And you may still not have it done well just simply because the client doesn't want to roam appropriately.
It's a bad driver. And now all of a sudden it's changed its behavior completely.
Exactly, right? And there's that. So when we look at cellular devices, though, first of all, first major huge difference here is rather than kind of being everyone for themselves, it's a managed network. That G Node B, is basically, or AP, if you want to think of it that way. The cellular AP is assigning access time to clients.
Yeah, it's
right?
Everything's scheduled, set condition-based like Wi-Fi.
Everything's managed, so there's that aspect. And then the roaming. Right? Yep. Roaming is so fast that, Salona said they've got use cases where they're having successful roams at 30 miles an hour. Yeah. I mean, that's fast.
And the technology is there for it, right? We all drive down the highway at legal speed limits of 70.
We've done this before.
We do that, right? Yeah. So we know the technology support is there, where Wi-Fi, it's just not quite there.
So I feel like there are certain situations where private cellular makes so much sense that I can't imagine companies not deploying.
Yeah. Now, I'll say this before we move on to the next topic. So if you're listening to this and you're a network engineer or security architect, whatever, I would love actually to have, Salona come on. Maybe we'll get them as a sponsor to talk through what they do. It's different in different regions of the world. So in the US, it's specifically the CBRS band that we use, and there's rules around, using that spectrum. So that's the space that they play in. And there's also different deployment models. So even here in the US, there are private cellular companies that put up basically whole telecom infrastructures in order to deliver private cellular. And then there's companies like Salona that have a cloud managed solution that, the best way I can describe it to somebody who's not familiar, it's kind of like Meraki or Juniper Mist, but with a cellular AP.
For cellular.
Yeah. And I think they said the installation model tends to be like 5-to-1. So for any given space that you're working in general, on average, for every 5 APs you have, you would need 1 indoor cellular. And of course, if you want to do this outdoors, there's use cases through COVID that a lot of municipalities use this for. You can go much longer distances with the right equipment, but for indoor use cases, that's what we were looking at. So let me scoot us on. We've got 2 more topics I want to get through, and one of them is this kind of long-standing problem we've had. Those of you listening know that I kind of geek out on Wi-Fi security. JD teaches classes with me around this, and WPA3 is the latest security suite. The problem is on the passphrase networks, we can't do those unique PPSKs. So different vendors call these different things. You might see it called PPSK for personal PSK, MPSK for multiple PSK, IPSK for, I don't know what that stands for, and then UPSK, which we saw this week, I think, from Arista, which was unique PSKs. But the problem is that model, just because of so in WPA2 personal, we had a function called PSK, pre-shared key. We keep calling the passphrase the pre-shared key, but actually pre-shared key is the algorithm. But in WPA2, that passphrase that you type in is the PMK, the pairwise master key in the Wi-Fi exchange. So it's easy to reverse that back out. However, as soon as we move to WPA3, PSK gets replaced with SAE. All of these acronyms don't matter, but the point is we can't reverse it back out. There's a great use case. There's lots of great use cases for using these multiple pre-shared keys where you give each user or maybe groups of your teams, like facilities management, HVAC has this passphrase to use, and whatever, your Sonos speakers has this other thing, so that A, you know what's what, and B, you don't have to rotate the whole population on a network. And then C, a lot of vendors offer micro-segmentation based on that passphrase. So like in a higher education, if I join with my passphrase, I have access to all of my random crap, but I don't have access to your crap, etc. But again, this breaks in WPA3. You want to talk about, the vendors are all doing weird stuff here. I don't know if that's weird is weird. It's different.
Well, I think in some cases it's weird and different, and in other cases it's just wrong.
Oh, well, tell us how you really feel.
One of the first kind of quote unquote answers that we saw to this was a vendor that what they essentially did was they did a downgrade attack. Whenever a WPA3 client tried to join, they downgraded them to WPA2 so they could reverse out the key, and then they kind of stood it back up as WPA3. And I don't question whether or not that works with most clients, like it may, but you are essentially downgrading them. And during that downgrade process, you are running an insecure network.
And you can't do that on 6 gigahertz, right?
Correct. You can't do it on 6 gigahertz. 6 gigahertz requires WPA3, as does Wi-Fi 7. So it doesn't matter if you're on 2.4, 5, or 6 gigahertz. With Wi-Fi 7, to run the Wi-Fi 7 PHY, you are required to be WPA3 or OWE, right? Like you can't do WPA2.
This downgrade attack that I know one vendor is doing it, maybe more might be doing it, but that's just going to break at Wi-Fi 7.
Yeah, exactly. It's very temporary. It
wasn't even a Band-Aid. It was more like when you super glue your cut shut.
Yeah. But it still bleeds out everywhere.
It still oozes out everywhere,
It's duct tape on the cut because the super glue is not a bad idea.
Yeah, but your fingers are also now super glued.
Yeah.
It's a mess. That's what it is.
I mean, you guys know, I am not a fan of downgrade attacks, especially on the security protocol. I do feel like if people are very transparent about what they're doing and they're upfront and there's an understanding, I can see it. However, I'm going to caveat it with, even Wi-Fi professionals don't understand the Wi-Fi security suites and what's actually happening in the back end. And so I'm very uncomfortable with that as a solution. And then we saw Arista kind of give us a different UPSK. You want to talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, so they're coming in with a new solution for them. And it's really, I think, the defining characteristic that I think a little bit, if you watch the video, got lost is this is for purely user interactive use cases. Right, so a lot of the individual PSK, MPSK, whatever we want to call it, use cases are targeted towards headless devices. Right, a lot of our stuff is headless device based. We're doing it because we want to segment our IoT without having to, because IoT devices are dumb and can't do more advanced things. This was really towards onboarding users using a PSK that they get that's theirs. But the way they did it was you had to join, and they had a default pre-shared key. So they had a default passphrase that you typed in, and that puts you in the provisioning side of things. And then you would log in, and the onboarding process was basically, they said, okay, here's your new password. And because you register your MAC address, and we all know these days, registering a MAC address is a disaster in the making. We have moved beyond MAC addresses as being a unique identifier. We've got to stop relying on it. But so you register your MAC address, and they say, okay, cool, here's your passphrase for the same network. So now the user has to forget the network to rejoin the network, which, going back with our MAC address, in default cases, it might trigger a MAC address rotation. So from a use case, the way it was presented, they came back later and we'll talk about that, but the way it was initially presented, it really kind of triggered, I think, a few of us at least, to be
way
like,
to
whoa,
put it.
whoa, whoa, wait a sec. The user experience there was not thought through. Now, they did say, oh, but you can also do multi-network, so stand up, the old thing we've been doing for years again, stand up an onboarding network and join the onboarding network and then remember to go to the other network. And there's issues with that, maybe a little less so, but I think they're trying to come up with a way to do it. Unfortunately, it's a lot of what personally I ran into with MPSK from Aruba in the very beginning on, via ClearPass is you've got to have the MAC address. You've got to do this. It's all tied to that. They've got to get in. They've got to register. They've got to move around. The security side of the world that we've seen, especially on handheld devices, has really made it a challenge for that. If we're trying to onboard, I had 32 pages of instructions with screenshots to walk a user through how to walk through the onboarding process in a simple onboarding tool.
It's so easy, anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Right? With 32 pages of instructions.
Yeah, with 32 pages of screenshots.
Just playing devil's advocate. And I feel bad saying that now because I said that during one of the presentations and I realized that the presenter snickered and said, I guess we're the devil now. And I was like, okay, wait, no, that's not what I meant. On one hand, it does feel clunky. I had a hard time following that workflow.
Yeah.
However, two things. I do want to give them kudos for not doing a downgrade attack to make this work. So bonus points for that. And because that use case is a human coming onto a machine, it is a lot similar. It's a lot similar to, I think, a lot of our normal, especially higher education, NAC onboarding workflows and registration. So if a student, it doesn't matter the NAC platform that's on the back end, whether it's ClearPass, FortiNAC, ICE, whatever. But if the student has their own little portal where they can, I'm making little typing gestures here, register their MAC addresses for different devices. It's very similar to that. I think the weird part is the whole, if you're doing it on the same network, now you've got to, so it almost feels like if you could have a provisioning network and then a different network, it would eliminate a lot of the things that you guys had some visceral reactions to.
Yeah. It would definitely alleviate some of that user experience stuff because people are used to that, right? And I think there's ways, I think we will see tools, right? The onboarding tools are getting better, the onboarding agents, apps, whatever we want to call it. There's more of an ability to do that via an onboarding application with two. I think that's what really threw me. I think once I got to the bottom of the technology, I'm like, okay, no, this isn't as bad as it seemed when it got a little confusing. Like you said, it was hard to follow some of where they were going with it.
I think the thing to call out here too is they are running into a problem that everyone's running into. This is a common problem in the industry. And the reality is that it's a little bit of the changes that had to be made to keep wireless secure, right? I think all of us are on the same page that WPA3 is important and it's good and it does the right things, but it does also kind of break some of those hacks that we had implemented in WPA2. And that's ultimately the issue, is that we've been running on hacks for so long that they feel normal. Because if we think about this,
the hacks have become a feature.
On the flip side, I think some of the friction that the customers are feeling is that a lot of them didn't adopt MPSK or PPSK until relatively recently. And then they're like, oh, we just got this all up and working and it's awesome. And then, oh crap, now we've got to upgrade to WPA3.
And now we're telling you to go to WPA3. And by the way, you can't do that in WPA3.
And you do need to go to WPA3.
Yes.
But I think so. Just kind of closing that one out, if I can. The whole WPA3 not working with MPSK, PPSK, IPSK, UPSK, WTF, PPSK thing it's not a standard. There is no standard for multi pre-shared keys, but there is a standard for WPA3, which doesn't support understanding who had which key when there's a multiple key scenario. And that's so if you see a vendor who can't do that or isn't doing it the way you want to, that is a issue across the industry. It's not a limitation with that vendor. And I might even dare say, well, if they don't have a solution for it, it's better than doing something dumb.
Maybe we'll get it in WPA4.
So the last thing I'll say is ultimately that is it, right? We have to rely on the standards bodies and the clients to come to an agreement on the way of doing it correctly. So WPA3 and SAE has the capability to pass a key ID. So that's potentially one way of doing it, right? But then the question then becomes, if you're using a MAC address and you're using a key ID and you're using some type of pre-shared passphrase, doesn't it just get simpler to use .1x, right?
You got into a can of
he dropped that
can of worms.
as his final step.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
A mic drop. I'm out.
Yes, exactly. So the last thing I was going to say about that is hand grenade.
Thanks. Oh.
Well,
No. I do love 802.1x. It's proven by the fact that we have 3D printed keys that say I love 802. And I have a tank top actually that says I heart 802.1x. Maybe I'll make those available to you guys. Okay. I was going to try to get to 2 more topics, but I think I want to just dig into this one. And that is kind of NAC and Zero Trust. Now, depending on how long you two take with this, because this could go off onto some little ranty side quest, and we may or may not talk about AI and the network stack. So let's just kind of hit on that NAC and Zero Trust in the LAN. And what I mean by LAN is like local network. So I'm going to put wired and wireless in this lumping, as opposed to, like up in the cloud and other places. So we've seen, Juniper with Mist, Arista now with, I think, their Agni product, AG&I, Meraki. They've all debuted their cloud NAC offering. So Radius in the cloud with some other, sprinkles to make it a little more NAC-y than Radius-y. I'm kind of a fan of this. I've been using cloud NAC personally for a while. And then we also have kind of more working towards true Zero Trust architecture, true micro-segmentation, because as somebody who has done NAC for a long time and loves NAC, I can tell you that none of the NAC vendors actually do micro-segmentation.
Nope.
At best, they're doing like downloadable ACLs, which just work like crap. So we kind of have like the traditional NAC and Cloud Radius, and we also, a little bit further along, I think, we saw something from Nile that felt a little more Zero Trusty and micro-segmentation-y to me. So I'm a little more excited about some of that than you guys are, but let's start with the Cloud NAC thing. What are your thoughts about what the vendors are doing in this space?
I think it's great. Having deployed multiple different NAC systems over the years, as much as I hate it because, I'm a ProServe engineer, so it kills my billable hours.
You can build them for something else.
Oh, absolutely. I find plenty of things. No, I think from an ease of deployment, from an ease of management, from a centralization, all of that, the Cloud NAC products are, I still twitch a little when we call them NAC, but that's a whole other thing. They're AAA.
But they did, though, I think they all showed us a little bit of either profiling, posturing, integration with endpoint security, integration with IDP. So it feels a little NACier.
I do like where we're at now, because yes, we are getting it, especially the integration that we're seeing with EDR, MDR, XDR, whatever the DR is.
And MDMs.
Yeah, MDMs. So now we're managing it. I really like that. I think where they're going, most of them are not trying to build their own identity stores where let's connect to your identity store and make it happen that way. I think they're all taking the right approach here, which thank you, finally. So yeah, that's been great. And I think what we see there is because it's becoming so easy, we're going to see more deployment of it. So we're going to see more 802.1x. Why? Because it's 3 clicks and I've got 802.1x deployed kind of thing. We wired port security. We've talked about wired port security in the networking world for years and years. And we always talk about it. And then it's like, well, yeah, but here's what we got to do to do it.
It's like sex in high school. Everybody's talking about it and nobody's doing it.
Or doing it well, but that's a different discussion. But yeah, I think it's, we really get into that now where with these vendors having that integrated within their solution, and it does become, I've seen it where I can deploy wired port security in a matter of clicks, and it works. It may not be full micro-segmentation, we'll talk about that in a minute, right? But at least I'm securing that port. And I think that's been a great thing to see from all of the vendors.
I think the thing that's interesting about this transition to Cloud NAC is it's really forcing vendors to consider what are the features that are worth porting over. And I think on one hand, it's a little bit frustrating because we're early in the cycle. So there are things that I think do get used in a lot of enterprise organizations that may not be there yet. It's frustrating to wait on that when maybe how your tunnels are set up, that was something that JJ got a little hot on, right? So tunnel setup, right? That may be one of those things where we don't have all the options yet, or maybe we don't even have the important options yet. So we're kind of working through some of those issues. But as part of that, what we're also doing is we're getting rid of a lot of fluff, because anyone who set up ClearPass or ICE or any of those Yeah, absolutely. Any of those products, what you know is that most organizations use 5% of the capabilities, but you still have to either A, turn off features, or there's still a lot of additional work you have to do to ensure that you're only running the services that you want. And that sometimes means spending more time working around the system than in and on the system, right?
And that's after you spent the week or two in training to even just figure out how to get the thing up and going.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
And plus pro services time. Because I don't know any organization that's successfully deployed a full NAC solution without pro services from somewhere.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
None of the platforms. It doesn't matter who you're.
Yeah.
So that's a ridiculous amount of complexity that we are at this inflection point. And while maybe it's a little uncomfortable in the beginning, I think we're going to make life a lot simpler for everyone on the backside of it. And I'm really excited by some of the options that we're seeing coming out of these various companies, because I think what we're seeing from them is a simpler experience. And I think anyone who's trying to compete with them will also have to be forced to maintain that simpler experience. So I think this is a positive thing for the industry, even though, right now it may be complex and difficult early on, and we may not be able to do everything that we want to do. We're going to quickly get to that point where we can do everything we need to do and don't have to deal with any of the garbage.
And so the cloud NAC solutions that we have now, and I mentioned, I think, Juniper, Arista, Meraki, I know there's more, but those are the three that were here with us today. And actually, that's probably the three that are in my head most right now. So their offering is, I would say, on par with what you could do with a basic Radius server. And then they have their own sprinkles of how they're integrating with like EDR and MDM, things we were talking about before, to do stuff that feels more like, posturing and profiling. But you're still, at the end of the day, you're switching VLANs, you're maybe doing some type of access control list that's dynamic. Whereas what we saw from Nile is kind of a whole different architecture and a different direction with that, which is, now, pros and cons. This does require you have their equipment in their stack, because they are using their network infrastructure as the enforcement point. I'm air quoting, but to use kind of trusted computing group terms here and zero trust terms, there's the policy engine that makes the decision, but then there's the how do you enforce that. And what I liked about what they did, and I know that I'm maybe in the minority here, but it truly is microsegmentation and zero trust in that it's identity based in addition to device, but it's not just at the typical layer 2, layer 3 segmentation control. Yep. We can get far more granular than that. And while they don't throw a /32 on a client, right? And the only other product or two in this space that does kind of air quote LAN microsegmentation does that. They throw a /32 on an endpoint. It forces that endpoint into them as the default gateway, and then they do magical things to visualize that traffic and then help you put policies. So that's not what Nile does, but they are using their infrastructure as that enforcement and to control that data path through what they call the head end. So edge switching up to core switching, basically. I like that story because to me, it solves a problem that we've had on the networking side where, so one of the things Drew and I are going to do in the next, few weeks is we're actually going to record a session just on understanding microsegmentation and the difference between doing that on a LAN versus doing it for workload and what it means for like a user accessing a resource. So this whole idea of, air quoting microsegmentation on a network and using the network stack and the network infrastructure as the enforcement mechanism, using it at just layer 2 and layer 3 is severely limited. And it's like, it's what we've been doing for a long time and we just struggle with. So I liked what Nile brought.
I liked this part of what Nile brought. I will agree with you. I think where Nile's taking microsegmentation and the way they're doing it from an approach of that is, we talked a minute ago, right? Secure by default versus secure by design. They are secure by default. And I think that they are one of the few players in the networking space that are doing that. I think that's the piece that they're bringing. Some of my concerns, don't have to do with this piece of it. I think they're making it easy. I think the way, their policy building engine that they showed was very straightforward. It was not, one of those things where I have to have a PhD to try and figure out how to write a regex to match traffic and send it out the right thing. So I think what they're doing there is really what we'd like to see, because I think our traditional networking vendors, some of this goes back to the approach and where they're coming in, right? We talked about the traditional networking vendors are building on what they've done. Nile's coming in with here's how we're going to do it different. The traditional networking vendors are trying it. We see it from all of them. Hey, we offer microsegmentation. We see standalone network microsegmentation products and all the rest. But I can tell you, as having worked on microsegmentation products or projects with clients, they come in, hey, I want to microsegment. It's like, cool. Have you segmented your network? Because let's start there. I think that's the understanding of application traffic flow is the only way a microsegmentation product works. I think what Nile has done is actually made that easier because you don't necessarily, the flexibility within their engine allows you not to have to go down to a per flow basis.
Let's talk about kind of the one elephant in the room there then, okay? Because when we talk about this, it sounds almost as if we're kind of covering all of the network traffic. But what we're really covering is the traffic within their stack, but it still has to leave northbound to go to a customer supplied firewall. And from, at least based on their presentation, they have no interaction with that firewall. So we still have a gap there that isn't currently addressed. And I would say applying policy on east-west traffic is important, but you still also have to consider that northbound traffic and the return traffic. And there's a huge security zone between their appliances and your firewalls and the internet that has to be considered, and it's not considered in their current design.
Not just there, but with the way, and this we'll get into some of the pieces where I wasn't quite so thrilled, shall we say, the way their network scales, once you hit a certain scaling point, once you hit the max of that NSB, the network services block, you have to implement another network services block. And they don't have a cross-connect solution for that. So you're vertically going to your firewall to route back down into the other portion. And so that security risk that we talk about, where we have to control it in separate places, and we know in security we hate policy engines in multiple places because they're never consistently applied. Now we're having to do it for some of that east-west traffic. Yeah. So now,
if you say single pane of glass, I'll buy you a drink.
As long as single pane is spelled P-A-I-N, then we're good on single pane of glass, right? So I think that's the piece where some of it, I liked what they were doing. Yeah. I think they have a good idea. I have some concerns.
And it's definitely not for everybody.
It's not. And I have some, again, my concerns with where they were are kind of separate from the security side. I think the security side actually redeemed them in my eyes in a lot of ways. So I think that was something. But yeah, the thing with, okay, I have to run my firewall. I have visibility and control within the black box of Nile, right? I configure the black box of Nile. I think that to me is still where we've got to look at, and they've done some integrations, I've heard that kind of stuff of, but if my firewall isn't understanding my network.
Or WAN solution, right? Because they don't have a WAN solution to talk about either. So if you're multi-site, how do you ensure that traffic flows between sites in a security manner?
I'm shaky on this, but if I think I understood what I heard, they deliver that next hop as OSPF routes here to whatever you want that next thing to be. Correct. Router, firewall, et cetera. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's definitely room for improvement in there.
I can't remember. I might have gotten, this is my first MFD.
Is it? It's a lot, isn't it? In 3 days.
I'm trying to remember what day it is, let alone which presentation. Yeah. But I think they talked about having some integrations out with, did they talk about integrations out to Zscaler? I thought they did, but again, I thought they had some. Or was that someone else? I
thought they had some integration to firewalls and others. However, you guys, like the first day, what was that, Wednesday? The first day of MFD 13, we were in here for 10 hours straight. Yes. And I don't mean 10 hours with, an hour and a half for lunch or something. We basically just have enough time to shove a sandwich in your mouth and keep going. So yeah, 8 and 10 and sometimes 12-hour days back to back. It all becomes a melty blur.
Yeah. They did. So I just found it in the slide. So when you watch the video, folks listening at home, they do talk about an integration with Zscaler and some of that kind of stuff. But that could be a whole nother episode of my concerns with cloud-based security platforms. It's good that they're going there. I think they use the word full stack, and it irked me because they are not a full stack solution. Yeah. You do not have a WAN routing appliance. That's part of the stack. In my mind, I know why they're saying that, and I think it's a little bit of okay, sure, if we want to split some hairs. But
I'll tell you this though.
I think when they get there, that'll be.
I'm curious to see. So one of the things that surprised me at RSA. So the cool thing was on the show floor, even the big vendors with the giant booths still had actual engineers and demos.
Yeah.
So I made my little list and I ran around and I got little technical updates from those engineers. And one of the products might have been Cato Networks, which is kind of one of the, I would say, up-and-coming, mid-market, ZTNA SASE type of solutions. Yep. What their engineer was describing to me is you take the firewall out.
Yep.
Which, of course, I went,
And we've been hearing that for years, but they're actually having, because I've gotten some tech updates from Cato too, they're actually making me go, okay.
Yeah. So I clicked for a minute. And I was like, oh. And then he explained it, and I'm like,
What if I just keep it in there and just let everything go through until I decide otherwise?
I'll use a really great 3-letter firewall that's a great router.
Put in bridge.
Yeah, just packet pass-through mode.
Okay, so we're coming up on time. If there's no last thoughts about that, I'm going to ask for your closing thought, because the one common thread through the 7 companies we saw this week was AI. Now, I'm sure JD has some thoughts and feelings about, AI versus ML, et cetera. And I know, Allyn, you had some feelings and thoughts about AI as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, JD. You go first this time.
For those who don't know, I previously worked for Juniper Networks, so I lived and breathed the AI that's built into all their enterprise products, that continues to build and grow there. I know some of the folks involved in that. I'm incredibly impressed with what they're able to do with the capabilities, but at the same point, I'm feeling the same AI fatigue as everyone else, right? I'm over the fact that people call very basic ML AI.
Here's my AI Excel macro for you.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, I mean, they put a connector into, LLM of choice, OpenAI or whatever, and now their product is AI enabled. And so, I'm kind of over being frustrated with that. Now I think as the quote, who is it? Show me the money, right? Now it's show me the impact. If you can't show me real actionable insights from this, I don't care. And that's kind of where I'm at right now is from an AI perspective, if you can't show me impact to users, to performance, to experience, to my day job, don't talk to me about it, is kind of the way I feel about it.
AI pudding.
AI pudding?
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, here all week, folks.
Yeah. So that's my take. What about you?
Yeah. I am going to say something that I've been saying for years. If you put the word magic in your product name, you're doing it wrong. So we saw a few things where I'm surprised because I haven't seen it in a while, but the word magic showed up on a few slides.
Did it?
It did.
And it wasn't Magic Packet.
Do you want to?
It wasn't magic. No.
We like Magic Packet.
Sure.
I love magic.
Do you want to name
Magic's
or do you want to
cool.
not name?
No, I don't need to name.
Okay.
I think what we did see is there were some cool use cases that people were bringing out, whether it's AI, ML, or proper data processing. I don't know. I think we definitely have seen it in security. We've seen it hitting networking. I'm also, I don't work for Juniper, but I do a lot of work with Juniper. The explainable AI portion of what Juniper has always put forward has always really impressed me. If you can't tell me what it's doing and how it's doing it, it's not AI. And I think where we've seen some of the other network vendors go with, we saw it where it was, well, AI plans your whole network. Well, no, it doesn't. I have inputted a wireless plan and you have done some mapping and stuff. I think that's where it's like, okay, come on, guys, that I would like to see them start to roll some of that back. I don't think they ever will, but I think where you were right on, if you can't show me why you're using AI, what it's actually doing for me and how it's delivering, it's useless. And I think that that's where, LLMs are great. I love LLMs. LLMs are not magic. They're really good bull. Like at the end of the day, their goal is to put together a string of words that resembles what a sentence would be. And
sometimes they don't do that well. Sometimes they literally are like drunk toddlers.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know, we've been in sales, right? If you sound confident, people believe you. And LLMs sound confident. So I think that that's where I'm happy to see some of the companies going beyond LLMs as their AI, because LLMs are not the only piece of AI. So yeah, I think you're right on.
So that's a great place to wrap up. We're right at an hour, and the listeners and Drew are going to kill me. But before I close this out, let me ask each of you, JD and Allyn, where can people find you online if they want to follow and connect with you?
I can be found at Subnetwork on most platforms, and Jonathan A. Davis on LinkedIn.
I am Allyn Crowe on LinkedIn, and I'm real creative, so I'm also Allyn Crowe on Blue Sky.
And that's Allyn with a Y and Crowe
Allyn
with
a Y, Allyn Crowe. You can also find me at netsecplumber.com because I'm the plumber at a security company.
It's like we have the Wi-Fi janitors floating on. All right, everybody, thank you guys so much for joining us for this slightly longer than normal episode. Drew will be back with me next week. And since he's not here to do the outro, I'm going to do a really crappy hack job of it, which is to tell you that we love our community. If you go over to packetpushers.net, you will find all of the different resources, the different podcasts. This is part of the Packet Pushers Network. In addition to a link to our Slack community, we do have a podcast channel in there. And since Drew's not here, I will tell you to do your security push-ups. And I'm so embarrassed to have said that out loud. Anyway, see you guys next week.